Pushkin.
Jesse Malin quite literally came of age on stage in the gritty clubs of New York City. At just 12 years old, he fronted Heart Attack, one of the earliest hardcore groups in the city. After they broke up in '84, Jesse went on to play in other groups, including Hope, and later co-founded D-Generation, a glam-punk band that toured extensively through the '90s, opening for acts like Kiss, the Ramones, and Social Distortion. In the early 2000s, Jesse launched a solo career, trading hardcore for a more singer-songwriter-driven approach. As a solo artist, he's collaborated with a wide range of musicians, including Bruce Springsteen, Lucinda Williams, and Billie Joe Armstrong. A true musician's musician, Jesse has long been a beloved figure in the rock community. So when he suffered a rare spinal stroke in 2023 that left him temporarily paralyzed from the waist down, that community rallied around him. The result was Silver Patron Saints, the Songs of Jesse Malin, a 2024 tribute album featuring covers of his songs by friends and admirers. Jesse's also debuting a musical this fall called Jesse Malin's Silver Manhattan, a musical guide to survival at the Gramercy Theatre in New York. On today's episode, Bruce Headlam talks with Jesse Malin about his colorful upbringing in Queens, how he found the nerve to try out for a gig at CBGB's at age 12, and what it was like during the formative years of New York's hardcore scene. Jesse also shares how his positive mental attitude helped him through the toughest chapter of his life, recovering from the stroke that nearly ended his ability to walk. This is Broken Record. Real musicians, real conversations. Here's Bruce Headlam with Jesse Malin.
I always assumed, because you're the mayor of East Village, that you grew up downtown New York, but you didn't.
Well, I'm not in politics. I don't know about the mayor thing. Somebody once said that. But no, I grew up in Queens, and I was born in Flushing. And, the city isn't that far away from Queens. But when living in a suburban middle-class kind of, place like that, it's not everybody goes there or gets to go there they stay sometimes and just become part of Queens. But I knew that there were things in the city, and you could, see it in magazines and hear it on the radio. Or if you went to the circus at Madison Square Garden, you might drive down another street and see something crazy and suddenly be like, wow, what's going on over there, Mm-hmm. And in movies, you got to see New York, which is different now. But yeah, Queens was definitely the early days.
And what was it like? What was family life like?
I grew up with my mom and my sister. I have a sister younger. My father left pretty early on, and my mom was a single mom who wanted to be a singer, but they got divorced young. They had us young. And she just did everything from waitressing to working at Bloomingdale's at a makeup counter to, whatever she could do to get by. And so it led for some freedom. Sometimes we had babysitters. Sometimes she couldn't afford babysitters. We were alone, and that was exciting. I didn't think it was anything bad or dangerous. It was fun to me, but my mom was very loving, but she had a lot on her plate. She was in her 20s. So I think sometimes she let me do a lot of things that a kid my age wouldn't be able to do or see, like go to see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson when I'm 8 for my birthday because, where other parents, she maybe felt bad she wasn't able to give other things, so she was loose, here's a record, or here's magazines you want, or, to break some of those rules. In those days, films were such a big thing for me. If I couldn't see a film, I'd read the Mad Magazine satire of it and pretend to somebody that I saw the film. But they were windows into an adult life. I really wanted to grow up fast. I was excited by film and music and teenagers. Queens had a different thing than my neighborhood in Whitestone, where people hung out in the streets, even though it was the 70s and it wasn't like doo-wop people in a tunnel, but there were like kids listening to like Leonard Skinner and drinking 40-ounce bottles in the park or schoolyard with a boombox, or, you'd hear Kashmir by Led Zeppelin, and, they were stoned out like a Cheech and Chong movie. The bus that went to school was a city bus, and it was just boomboxes and smoke. And I got caught up in, radio, AM radio first. And me and my cousin would judge any song. If we heard on the radio, we'd try to go at a buck or 50 cents, I think, and buy a single at Corvettes out there. And then if we liked it, the way we judge it is we could jump on the bed really fast and try to hit the ceiling. That meant it was a good song. Mm-hmm. And in the 70s, the 50s was a big nostalgia. So American Graffiti, we got Chuck Berry, Johnny B. Good, and it was so rocking. And Elton John came out with Crocodile Rock, which had a 50s thing. And suddenly I got into Elton John, and that would be the first artist that I really, some babysitter had Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and I just opened it up and I stared at the illustrations for each song, and I read the lyrics along with the record, and it was very adult, but there was something dark, but here were these beautiful songs with this beautiful voice, and then there was some kind of anger and something dirty and screwed up, and I don't know what's going on to Marilyn Monroe or what happened with this lesbian Alice or this, but I wanted to know, and I felt something even though I didn't know fully.
Was that stuff a little scary to you or just attractive to you?
It was attractive, scary a little in some of the photos. The drummer, Nigel Olsson, had long hair. He looked like a woman. And then it was just, it said it was okay. I liked in Benny and the Jets because I'd be angry at my father, angry at teachers. And it said, we'll fight our parents out in the street to prove who's right and who's wrong. And it was like a rallying cry. And some of this I'd never heard a live audience. The beginning of Benny and the Jets, you hear a crowd applause. And you felt like it was a concert entering your little room. And then Elton John came out in the 70s that he was bisexual, and we were living in a kind of racist, homophobic, it's Archie Bunker's Queens. It's a lot of closed-minded people that would say stuff about other races. And, we grew up talking that way. And my family, my grandfather and, they were Jewish people. I wasn't raised religious, but they understood discrimination and that kind of persecution that people got. So we were hip to that we weren't going to say the N-word or look at anyone different than us, black, white, red, brown. It was in that way that was put into my head that people are people and that there's no judgment. So when Elton John kind of came out and said, oh, he's gay, he's bi, he's this, to me, I was like, well, that's cool. That's okay. If my guy he's great, Elton John. And here was this person that had to wear glasses, and I had to wear glasses. And here was this guy that wasn't beautiful looking, like a Rod Stewart or Robert Plant, and took maybe the things, and I didn't realize at the time, but those weaknesses where you don't feel you're the super Elvis hunk, and you do all this other stuff to make yourself larger than life and create your own image and your own art and reality with your appearance. And that was mixed with this beautiful voice and the fact that, oh, he's bisexual, and kids said, oh, he's gay. He's like, well, then that's okay. So it sent a lot of great messages to somebody. Same thing with seeing the movie Dog Day Afternoon at a young age, and you find out that Al Pacino's robbing the bank, the character Sonny, to pay for his lover's, operation to have a sex change. And I'm in Queens where everybody is so anti-gay, and yet it's Al Pacino who just did The Godfather and just did Serpico. It's the guy like in Saturday Night Fever when John Travolta goes, Al Pacino, wow. They were a hero, and they stuck with him. I remember nobody yelled out, homo, or walked out. Everybody stayed. And it just, the message is that it's okay to be different. It's okay to be weird. And I was hyperactive kid. I was getting thrown out of school. I was angry. So I had to go to therapist or go talk to people in the school. So I thought, oh, I'm crazy, or they treat me like crazy. Well, then maybe crazy's okay. And maybe the character in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is different than the rest of the mold in the system, in the mainstream. And I think those were punk rock ideas that were being fed into me. And then I got into Kiss. I was at that age, and they were from New York. And it was like, all the action films, Billy Jack and Clint Eastwood and everything, and rock and roll thrown into one, and fire. And at that point, the older kids, they didn't like it. The kids that like Sabbath and Zeppelin and even the Grateful Dead, it was like, Kiss sucks.
Yeah.
So you got beat up.
It was the first album, that Kiss album, I guess Destroyer. I remember people just carrying around at school with their books.
Yeah, well, it looked so cool.
I know, there's no record player. It's just like they just carried it with them everywhere they went.
Well, it was 12 inches. It's it's a statement. But so that was, loved the band. I was in the Kiss Army. I would have did anything. Played in the talent show first time, spitting ketchup instead of blood, dressed as Gene Simmons. But the thing about them, it was a band. It felt like a gang. It felt like more than just a song. It was like, I want to be part of this thing. I want to raise my fist. I want to tell my parents I'm not going to be like them and work that job. I'm not going to turn into them. There's another chance. There's another road. And we got beat up and made fun of by everybody that, was like, Kiss sucks, that didn't like it. So that was preparing me for punk rock, because once I got into that, then you're really hated at that time, even by, it wasn't like these days where people like a lot of different things. You liked what you liked, and if you were into punk, they figured you killed your girlfriend like Sid Vicious, you're a junkie, you're the fat, whatever it was. It wasn't, it didn't have that open-mindedness that a festival might have right now at Coachella or somewhere where you get a little everything.
Yeah, it's fine.
But I respect, like in the mods and rockers or punks and skins, like I respect that people, if you go to London, you go to some ska show now or something and you see people that they're lifers, like rockabilly, like they're in it and they'll fight and that's their thing. Metal people are like that, that they're very into it. That dedication I respect, but I think that, we all kind of probably like just good music, all kinds of music, as long as it's good,
Yeah, no, they used to have tribes.
Yeah.
What was the first punk song you heard?
I probably heard Blitzkrieg Bop, but I didn't realize what was going on. It came through on the radio, and I just knew it. But I was watching some TV Choice Awards, some kind of award show somehow, and the Sex Pistols came on. And I'd heard about them in the New York Post and a few things, but it just, just seeing the little clip of how Johnny Rotten played to the camera, and it was way tougher than Kiss and way angrier. And it also was like, I could do this, I think. Like, it just had a thing. It was like, if Kiss made me want to yell and scream, this made me, want to go to my room and throw everything out and like just start again and break things up in a way.
Now, had you started playing any instruments by this point?
Yeah, like around the Kiss time, I started to go for some guitar lessons. And of course, they're teaching you Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin, and they're teaching you all this Free Bird and classic stuff. And it took a lot of work.
Yeah.
So once I, then got a Ramones record, I realized, they're from Queens. They wear the same leather jackets as Fonzie, one of my TV heroes. They're like a band, like the way the Beatles and Kiss are. Like each person is like a character, and they have these chants. Like Kiss had, these shouted out loud or Rock and Roll Night, these big anthems to chant certain parts with the floor tom and the snare. Well, the Ramones had it in a different way. They're yelling, "Hey ho, let's go," or "Lobotomy." So I started to learn those songs, and from learning those songs, I was like, I can write. And we heard about CBGBs, and somebody said, if you call this number, you can come in and do an audition. And I was like 12. And I called.
This amazes me. I so want to hear this story.
I called from the school payphone, and the rule was you had to play original music. So you'd put together a band with whoever, like, you have a basement and your father has a drum set, you're the drummer. Like, we'd get whoever could contribute. And I wrote some songs, and we practiced in the basement of somebody else because I lived in an apartment. And we got dropped off on the Bowery on a Monday night, and we went in there. It was pretty scary. It was like March, and we were all about 12 or 13. And we got on that stage, and it was like the whole place smelled like, I didn't know, piss and alcohol and vomit, but that's what I thought it was supposed to be. And I couldn't believe this was the place where Blondie and Talking Heads and everybody in Ramones had played. And we played our set, and I called a week later, and they said, we failed, the audition. And I was into the Dead Boys and the Ramones and the Pistols. And they said, yeah, you missed it. That stuff's over, man. Like, you got to try something new. Like, that's because this is 1980. So I was like, well, all right, what? And they were like, like rockabilly or new romantic. Or I was like, wait a minute, this is weird. But I found out in time that you had to bring 20 people that drank. We didn't bring anybody.
Yeah.
And but somehow a week later, I got a call to play at Max's Kansas City. There was somebody that saw us there. And they booked us for that July 15th it was, I remember, because it's Johnny Thunder's birthday, and we knew who he was, and he actually showed up at the gig. But we got to play a show at Max's, and little by little, what they told me I had missed, this raw, punky music that I was just getting into, it was changing. Blondie was starting to get more pop and disco. Ramones are putting on striped shirts and taking off the leather and working with Phil Spector, and everybody was trying to have a hit. And I walked a little further down a street where I bought my leather wristbands and records, called St. Mark's Place. And I walked further. As I walked further down, on the light post, there were signs that looked punky to other clubs that weren't advertised in the Village Voice. And they said, come down to A7, 7th Street Avenue A, and Bad Brains, Stimulators, False Prophets. And that led me to another place where this music was still going on. And somehow, without cell phones and without, even this being in the paper, we used this, like in Spaceballs, used the Schwartz or whatever, some collective unconscious thing. We found each other, kids my age and a little older, from Jersey, Long Island, Brooklyn, Queens, a lot, all ended up on Avenue A because of music. So in Queens, you had a band like Kraut coming, or in Forest Hills, Queens, you had Reagan Youth. And the name says a lot right there. You know, the Undead lived in the city, False Prophets on Avenue B. And we all just, maybe 50 or 60 people were part of this thing that would become hardcore. And I didn't realize that this was kind of happening in different cities where, yeah, maybe that was over in the Ramones, but somebody that saw the Ramones took it to another level. And you had Black Flag in California, and you had Dead Kennedys in Northern California and down in D.C., and it wasn't ready to end. It was a new chapter, and Reagan was president, and it felt like we had a lot of things to sing about. It was faster. We had our own way of dancing, and you had 1 minute to say everything that you felt about the world. So Heart Attack was my band. That was the name. Yeah. We put out a single called God Is Dead when I was 14, and that is pretty much, I think it's known as the first New York hardcore single. I'm not saying it's the best, whatever. It goes for $1,000 and change or a couple $1,000. It's a rarity, but we did that.
You kept some, right?
I kept the test pressing somewhere. But that was a thing that came out and made me not want to be in school anymore. And from that, we played the Ritz with the Misfits, or we started to play with groups like Bad Brains, who were incredible. That was a band that had jazz fusion chops for black dudes from DC that took punk rock to a whole nother level, being tight, precise. The whole performance was like nothing I'd ever seen. And to know them, and we had cheap gear, Japanese guitars, and they were adults. They were 19, 20, 21. They had real equipment. They would lend us their equipment, and they're talking about PMA, positive mental attitude. It wasn't the 70s destroy, cut yourself. It was like, yeah, we can be crazy, have fun, and not do drugs, and not put a needle. Drugs just never seemed exciting to me. Put a needle in your arm, put some shit in your nose, guys scratching, got scabs. To me, I want to see a strong guy going crazy up there, or a strong guy, it wasn't, we want to say all this stuff, get in your face, and a lot of us are sober. We mean this.
Mm-hmm. You were never tempted down that other path? Because you're downtown New York and in the early 80s.
It didn't seem sexy. Someone told me heroin. I didn't like when I got the flu because I couldn't go out and do what I like to do. And someone said heroin, if when you get sick, it's like the flu times 10. And, you'd look over and it was some scratchy, it just didn't look fun to me. Mm-hmm. And
you were exposed just enough to it to know that.
Yeah. And there were some people saying, you don't need to do that. I didn't understand. We'd be dragged to an after-hours club, and suddenly, what are they doing here? There's no bands. This music sucks. There's sand on the floor like a beach. And why are these people here till 7? Well, I know now. It's like, I just thought they had a cold. I don't know. The guy sniffing. It was so naive. But it was always about the music. And I think my mom trusted that. So I could go to junior high school and I could go to A7 and 171 or CB's or Max's. In the beginning, the parents tried to pick us up here and there. But the shows in those days, the bands wouldn't go on till 1 or 2. So they gave up on that. And then I'd sneak out. But she knew, my son has this dream. He believes in music. And by the time, still that year of my first record, we went to Mexico City, did a tour when I was 14. Things started to open up.
What was it like to be a 14-year-old touring and seeing Mexico City and...
It was interesting. I had to figure out, suddenly nobody wanted to talk to me in school. No girls ever gave me, I felt like the biggest loser. And suddenly, there's somebody interested in me? This is weird. But to get to play every night and learn how to control, in Mexico, we did 10 shows in a row at a place called Hips and Tenta. And how to wow, I'm playing so hard. I cut my nail off and I'm bleeding all over the SG guitar. We got to gaff that. I got to learn how to control my voice. I got to learn how to be able to sustain this and have a tight show and make flyers for each show with glue and cutting things out, and just learning in those early days how to make it happen when there's no label, there's no manager, learning how to book your own shows. All those DIY, as they call it, kind of ethos has really stuck with me throughout, even when I was singer-songwriter or whatever, all through my music career, that there's ways that we can make this happen. So that was a lesson. The drummer I had at the time was in his 20s, and he was from Mexico, and he lived in a Kenmore Hotel on 23rd Street, this welfare spot. But hung out with older people. I was the youngest, and I just wanted to know more about the world, and I wanted to be better. And I was taking in these records. I was a kid too. I had a lot of rules, like you could only listen to stuff that had certain kind of guitar. And when Sandinista came out at that time by The Clash, and they were playing all these different styles of music, I broke it into pieces. I was like, "Give me the Dead Kennedy." I rebought it 4 years later. I was like, "They're right. I was wrong." But I'm like, "They're playing disco. They're selling out. They're selling." I didn't go to Bonds when The Clash came. I saw them at London Calling, but like my favorite band, suddenly they were hipper than I was, blending the world, bringing it all together, that hip hop was the music of the streets and had a message, and it was a punk rock in its own way. But at the time, at that age, I needed things in boxes. I needed, this is hardcore. This is what we're doing.
Well, it's identity at that age.
Yeah.
And your identity's, that's how you differentiate yourself.
And we were competitive to who was fastest, who was tightest, who got the mosh pit going the most, and, got action happening. And the Bad Brains asked Heart Attack to open for them at Irving Plaza, their first big gig. And I was really surprised. We had a song called God is Dead. They were very religious, Rastafarian. Yet we got this big show, and they were so good to us. And, to see these different things develop and to watch that scene grow in, like I said, just organically. And if you went on tour, people put you up on their floor. People, you booked a whole tour on like a stolen credit card you bought on 42nd Street or some phone card, and you were able to go across this country. And when you got to San Francisco, the guy had the fanzine there, Maxim Rock and Roll, Tim Yohannan, he put you up on his couch and let you make a mixtape of his record collection, and you'd meet another band, and it was just a thing. And watching that and being part of that was exciting until around 84. It became a little too macho for me, a little too metal, this hybrid kind of thing. And it started to get extra violent. And it wasn't guys and gals on the dance floor, and it wasn't gay and straight and this. And it was like became this metal macho thing, which was everything I was trying to get away from in Queens. Right. So I felt I dropped out. I broke up Heart Attack in 84. And our last gig was at CBGB's 4th of July. And it was the first Chromax gig. They were on the bill. And I remember that was part of the new thing. And they were great. But it was going to become this other heavier, more metal type of thing. And that would go on and get a lot bigger, and now even bigger than ever since then. But I started to want to write songs like the songs where lyrics mattered. And I started listening to things from my early youth, like Jim Croce and Elton John. And somehow I stumbled upon Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, and I'd never been a fan.
I thought you would have been one of those fans from the beginning, but it was Nebraska that did it.
It had his other records had long songs. It was in a deep voice. It was a lot of instruments and sax, and I didn't really know what he was singing about. I wasn't from Jersey. I thought he was singing about Jersey. It just, all these things that didn't fit in my box. He had a beard. It's like, to be honest, I mean, I love the guy now as a person at Edison Arts, but then I heard Nebraska and I said, whoa, this guy is this big rock star, and this record is just him. And, I'd already had all this punk rock, political, caring, social ideas about the world and the underclass. And he's singing about this in such a great way, and it's haunting, and I couldn't get enough of it. And so when Born in the USA came out, I was a fan, and all my friends on the scene were like, what's with this major label Rambo shit? And I was like, have you read the lyric sheet? Mm-hmm. Like, half these people end up in jail. This is not... And that mixed message to America probably made them a lot of money, that people thought it was, pickup trucks and Born in the USA. And then I realized this guy's deal. And then I found another record that same time, which I called the punk rock Nebraska, which was Johnny Thunder's Hurt Me. And it was an acoustic solo record in the early 80s. And it was in my rehearsal studio. One of the other bands had their records there in a turntable. And it was just Johnny Thunders alone playing his songs and a few covers, Joey by Bob Dylan and Eva Destruction, Barry McGuire. And it had a great thing. Sometimes it sounded like a whiny junkie screaming in a little closet, but other times there was something. And I started busking in the L train on 14th and 1st Avenue in New York, just make some extra money. And I would sing my own new songs, and I would throw in some oldies, and then I'd try to make like Ramones songs sound like 50s songs next to the Dion song, and I'd make like $70. But that's when I started to realize that with an acoustic guitar, I could write songs, bring it down, and I wanted to try something different.
And you were always writing on electric at this point?
I had always been before, and that I wanted to present these songs. And then I'd go to some clubs. There was a great club called Danceteria that booked people that were coming up, and I saw the Pogues and the Replacements, and I saw Billy Bragg. And here's a guy, it's very punky, but it's him alone with an electric, and he's got these political love songs, and he's got his vulnerability is out there. So between Billy Bragg, the Replacements, who weren't scared to do a ballad, this Johnny Thunders record, and then I started, going back to Elvis Costello and Graham Parker, and it's like, I want to do these kind of song things. And my first gig, I started a band called Hope, and all my punk rock friends had acoustic guitar, started calling me Jesse Cougar Malenkamp.
We'll be back with more from Jesse Malin and Bruce Headlam after the break.
So you became a singer-songwriter
I did in a band called Hope, and I tried to do everything that I would do in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
But I couldn't get that band off the ground. I couldn't get us recorded outside of a demo. We'd play with like the Meat Puppets and Sonic Youth and Rat at Red R. From Heart Attack, I had a connection into the noise art scene that was coming out of some of the clubs here. Mm-hmm. So we would play on bills with Live Skull and Rat at Red R, Sonic Youth, Swans. And Hope did our time for a little bit, but it was a weird time for me. My mom got sick, and I had to go back to Queens. I was living in my rehearsal studio on Avenue B, and I had to take care of her and my sister. Mm-hmm. And so I decided I could move my gear. If I got a cheap used van, I could become a moving guy. So I started moving bands and gear from like rehearsal spots in Midtown down to clubs and coming back at the end of the night. Sometimes I'd watch the show, and anything, furniture and pianos and dead dogs and everybody from Barbra Streisand to, some junkie that's getting thrown out the window, mm-hmm. from they're getting evicted. And we'd go everywhere. I met a lot of artists doing that, and I had a rough 5 years between my mom passing away eventually, and I couldn't get this band off the ground. So I ended up, after my mom passed, moving to Greenpoint, Brooklyn with a few friends. And I kept trying to do this earnest songwriter thing. And I was living with this guy, Howie Pyro, who had been in The Blessed and been in a band called Freaks and done all these things. And I said, let's just make a band for fun where, I don't play guitar, and I just jump around and roll on the floor and take my shirt off and yell. And we'll make like the band we wanted to see when we were little kids, like that 5-headed thing, like the Dolls or the Dead Boys or Aerosmith or Rolling Stones, but a punky. And so we made Degeneration, mm-hmm. and it was just for a goof. And suddenly that connected because we just did it totally for fun. Suddenly the shows are crowded. It's a band. It's a gang. It's all people that mm-hmm. knew each other from the hardcore days. Yeah. So it was like kind of, some people would say a glam band meets a hardcore band. I don't really think of us as glam, but, we thought we were doing something so different. We had brothel creepers for feet, standing tall, tight pants, and messy hair and messy mascara, and I had crazy dreads and hair extensions. And so people looked at that and talked about that, and they listened to the songs. So that became frustrating, even though it was a good 7 years and we made records. In major cities, we had a good time. Everywhere else, it was like us fighting with the crowd.
So in that period where you had that band, you've got a tour to make money, obviously.
Yes and no. Because we got a huge record deal and we had money. We broke it up so we would not take it all, whatever. We used some on the record, and then we gave each other like a weekly or every 2 weeks. So we could stay in New York and become junkies and stuff like a lot of people did. But we did want to tour. But at that time, New York, the 90s, we were like the big band in the scene in downtown. We didn't like to go above 14th Street because it wasn't easy for us. So we did tour. We went out with the Ramones, mm-hmm. and you don't get paid a lot opening, but we learned a lot. And those guys were so generous to us. And I became friends with Joey, who just loved music. Like his MO was, he wasn't about sex, drugs, or money. It was like he just listened to music. He was kind of a real misfit and had a lot of health things and was a creature from a different type of thing. So he just so passionate. He used to ride on our tour bus. They were in a van, smart, saving money because they knew buses. Oh, really? And we're in this big record company supported bus, and he didn't want to be around his band. He'd be sitting in there with us.
Oh, interesting. I love the jump from van to bus. It's all about transportation.
It is. It's funny, and you hate the van. You think, oh, man, I could go in my bunk now, and I can listen to music, and I can, be alone and sleep. But I feel like you're tighter as a band connectively as people. Like you get along better in the van. Like you listen to the same thing, you get the same kind of jokes. It's like summer camp, or, it's like there's a camaraderie that once you get in the bus, everybody's like in a separate thing. And at least that's what I've experienced. But yeah, we did tour. And we toured. We did that band for 7 years. We were on EMI, then we were on Sony. We got dropped, and then we got another record deal. I thought, I'm going to have to sell shoes on St. Mark's Place or go back to moving furniture. But like somebody said, no, you're going to get another deal. And I'm like, all the bands I knew, they had that one shot in the 80s to try to be the next Guns N' Roses or whatever, and they ended up.
Right.
And now this is 90s, grunge and all that stuff is in. So we're trying to be the reaction to that. Like, we're not going to wear flannel and look like a farmer or a gas station attendant. Like, we want to look like a band and have this thing. And we had a thing, whatever the music is and whatever people feel about that. And I like some of the songs. We had a thing as people where it was real, so we could be really intense or really down on each other, but it was organic friendship, gang connection to music that worked on stage. And after about 7 years of doing that, and we went to Europe and toured with Green Day and Ramones and all kinds of bands and some of our heroes and stuff, and then I just felt again, like similar to Heart Attack, that nobody they weren't caring again about the lyrics, what we were singing about. They were just talking about our outfits and shoes. And at that point, the mosh pit came back again. We'd be out with Offspring or these bands, and the whole punk thing was the next wave of that, the 90s Rancid, Green Day, Offspring type of time. And so the whole show was about if we can get them dancing all crazy, and they weren't listening to songs. So I'm sitting in the van, we're back in the van, or on the bus, and I'm listening to Neil Young again. I'm listening to Springsteen. And now I'm listening to Counting Crows and Wilco. And there's these other things that are out there. Steve Earle, suddenly I hear that. And I'm like, wow, this has rock and roll, but there's songs. And suddenly Lucinda Williams. And I called up Joey Ramone and I said, I'm listening to this woman, Lucinda Williams. Because he'd always say, Jess, what are you listening to? We'd call every day. And I said, Lucinda Williams? She's on a Steve Earle record? And he said, I know her. I was like, how do you? He goes, I was on like a songwriter panel with her at the Bottom Line, and I was like, wow. And then years later, I'd meet Lucinda Williams, and I said, yeah, Joey. And she goes, oh, yeah, he sent me a song. He had a song he wanted me to write about a train. And he was passed away by then when I met Lucinda. But I just kind of was looking for, again, to break it down, to go solo. And I watched suddenly people were coming out with acoustic guitars and approaching it. Maybe it was called alt country now or whatever. Like there's all these different eras where rock and country, maybe it's the Byrds. And then in the 70s in LA, it's with the Eagles and this. Or, then you have Rank and File in the late, whatever, Long Riders. And to me, it's don't need those separate boxes. I was like, I don't know. Can I be a solo guy? That seemed like very adult to me. I was scared. I was like being in a band.
What kept you? I mean, at this point, you're 30.
Yeah, early 30s or something.
It's a tough life.
Yeah.
A very hard life you're leading. All these ups and downs. And a lot of people did drop out. What kept you going?
Just, I guess, the love of music, the drive. I always had a lot of drive and always excited about the next thing that I was going to make and having something that was there. If I woke up and I was like, wow, I don't know if I want to go on stage and hit myself with the microphone and scream, Frankie for Degeneration tonight. I kind of want to play this acoustic guitar and have some people hear these songs. And I think there's a way to present this that could not be just me sitting on a stool with hush puppies, growing a mustache and not that there's anything wrong with that, but that I can find a way to be me and sing these New York story kind of songs and still be the songwriter guy, but come from where I come from, hardcore or whatever. And I really want to do this. I have this idea. And so somebody was nice enough to give me a weekly residency at a club called Brownies on Avenue A and go in there. And I grabbed a piano player, this guy, Joe McGinty, and we rehearsed in a little rehearsal studio. And I'd take my acoustic songs and he'd play a little piano on them. And suddenly I was like, wow, there's a song there. Or, and I was thinking about Tom Waits, and I was thinking about Nick Cave, and I was thinking about Nebraska, Springsteen. But then it came out to be something different and have a place to do this every Wednesday night for a month or two. One gig is like 10 rehearsals. So,
Yeah. Was there a time when, you started writing songs in those voices? Were you sitting there going, this is a Tom Waits song. This is this song. Was there a moment where you thought, oh, wait a second, it's my song now?
wasn't so aware of it. Usually you have some smart aleck musician. Usually it's the drummer, and you bring in a song, and they say, "Oh yeah," and they start singing the song that you ripped it off from, or whatever they think. And everything comes from something. I think it's how you mix it up in the pot. You could take all these different ingredients and spit it out in your own way. But I wasn't aware till I started to read the reviews. And when my first solo record came out in England first, it got some reviews that were more positive than a lot of things I had experienced in a long time. And let those people say, explain what it was. And I was like, oh, really? All right. They hear. And it was nice. It was the first time, though, where like they got both sides of Queens Boulevard, the borough, like, yeah, Simon and Garfunkel and Johnny Thunders, like they got that I was, a creature of both those worlds. And when you read a review, they say you shouldn't read your press, but when they're getting what you were setting out to do, which had never been the case with Degeneration, then you kind of feel like, wow, maybe I'm onto something here. People are connecting to this.
Is it harder to grow up in music in New York? Because in a lot of places, it's not that their standards are lower, but if you're the local band, they're kind of happy for you. There's not too many local bands, and they're supportive. Right. When I talked to Sleater Kenny about, being in Portland, it's like everybody's lifting you up. New York's competitive.
Yeah,
even the critics are competitive, and part of their competition is who can say the pissiest thing about something.
Yeah, New York. I mean, if you think about it, the bands. There hadn't been a big rock band. I mean, and even out of CBGB's Blondie, I guess they broke, but there hadn't been until, I guess, then came the Beastie Boys, the Ramones. There, it was like a curse, Sonic Youth, it's a rock band, a little different. Beastie Boys not really a rock band, but those acts got big, but nothing. It was always, the record companies wanted to sign something from Athens, Georgia at one point. They want to sign from Seattle or anywhere, and the labels are here in New York, so they really don't want to see you. They see you out and about. But I guess in the early 2000s, which was when I was doing my solo stuff, that rock and roll in New York got to really happen, and with Strokes, Yeah-Yeahs, Interpol, all that. And even though maybe I wasn't, in those bands, it was nice to see that really happen in a great way. And I remember friends of mine being really jealous of the Strokes and talking crap. And I was like, I know what that's like. 'Cause I was like a band that people talk shit because other musicians are, competitive, jealous. And I was like so happy. And yeah, maybe they grew up with similar records that I did, the Strokes, but they had their own take on it. They spit it out in their own way. And it's nice to see. But yeah, it was definitely in our time, not a place where the journalists wanted to write about what was going on here. They're looking somewhere else. And it's a competitive place, and a place that'll break your heart, like like Hollywood. People go there to be famous, and, there's a big competition. There's a big, it's not what you think it's going to be.
I want to talk a lot about your solo career, but I want to do it through this new album because I want to talk about the people and the songs. But we probably should, because we haven't explained, tell me about May 4th, 2023.
Wow.
What was going on?
Well, that had been a year that my bass player and best friend Howie Pyro died, who was in Degeneration. And I had done a lot of fundraising to, concerts and memorials even after he passed, but benefits in the beginning. He had a liver transplant, and he had passed on that day. I was on tour in Germany and Berlin. I said goodbye to him through the phone or whatever, but it was a year later, and we wanted to celebrate him. Some of his friends and his family, his sister flew in, and so I created a dinner at 6:00 near my house, this Italian spot, with some of those friends and family, and we were going to go DJ and celebrate him. It sounds weird to celebrate someone's death, but he was morbid, and he would have liked any celebration. So I'm walking over. I'd rehearsed that day. I had a couple meetings. I took a little disco nap. I was ready, and I just was going out. I was going to eat, and I brought some cash with me because it's an Italian restaurant. It's only cash, no credit card. And it was 12 people, and I threw the party, so I was going to pay for the bill. And I'm starting to walk there, and I run into Jonathan Tobin. He's a DJ that's been around the world, plays old great records, and he's a friend of Howie's. And so I started to feel my hips and feel weird walking the street. I thought it was the boots I was wearing, or I thought it was my back. And as I ate the dinner, I tried to pretend that this wasn't happening with these 12 people. And suddenly I ended up in so much pain, but I kept trying to fake it. Ended up on the floor. My best friend, Jimmy G from Murphy's Law, hardcore singer, was there. And he said, "Come on, I'm going to call an ambulance." And I said, I'm going to shake it off. I'm going to shake it off. And I realized I couldn't. And then I realized it was time to pay the bill, and everybody's coming around me like, go over there. It was like Rosemary's Baby. Everybody had a different phone out, like, do this, try this. They're all over me, standing over me, all these interesting looking people. But I paid the bill with the cash to the waiter. I was like, take $80 tip. And I was laying there, and then I tried to get up, and then I realized that my legs were just ice and numb. And so I said, call the ambulance, and it took me to one hospital and then next, and took till the next day until I got a room. And that's how it is with that. And it took a while for them to figure out what had happened. And it's a very rare thing. It's a spinal stroke. And even at NYU here in New York and Mount Sinai, they don't see that many of them. And it left me pretty much paralyzed, from the spinal cord. The legs, couldn't walk, everything below the waist. And
so is it a stroke in your brain? It's like a blood clot or something.
Something infiltration in the spine where blood isn't getting to the area, and the nerves disconnected. And so 3 months in the hospital because they're figuring things out. And it was a rehab hospital, still NYU, and they said, you'll never walk again, and doctors weren't very optimistic. So a lot of friends of mine, a couple that have dealt with themselves in alternative medicine, they've had cancer and they've tried other ways to not just go with the mainstream medicine. And one of them called like 40 places about stem cells and found a place that specialized in spinal cord injuries and they were in Argentina, and they gave stem cells, and they don't do it here. The FDA hadn't approved this.
Right.
And it wasn't expensive, but it was going to be 6 months in this other country, and I'm already so shaken up. Now, I lived in a walk-up, so I couldn't go back that day. I left. I never packed. I never moved out, but I could never go back. So before I went to Argentina, which I would say yes to, I'm in hospitals. Then I'm in hotels, and luckily people raised some funds for me through Sweet Relief and the music community. I was able to stay in hotels because I had to cancel 6 months of touring. And all my stuff got put in storage. People moved me out of that. It was a rental, but I'd been there 10 years. And it was really haunting to never go back. And, so I didn't have anywhere to live. So I said yes to Argentina for 6 months. And it wasn't a money grab. And they were really compassionate, intelligent, hardworking people at this clinic. And not everybody spoke English. And that made it challenging. And but I got a lot out of it, and I got stem cell treatments along with 5 days a week of 5 hours a day of really intense PT. Scary stuff, putting blindfolds on you and get you up on. They want to get you up, and it did a lot. It was boot camp.
Part of it keeping your legs moving so the muscle doesn't atrophy?
Yeah, in some way, and learning how to use other parts like the quads and the hips, and so if somebody sees me now and I can get up with a walker, I might have braces on below my knees, but I'm using other muscles and I'm using other things from doing it every day. And I was just convinced that, I want to beat this somehow, beat the odds. And when you see an MRI and you see there's a disconnection in there, and then there's other things that go with just not walking, that go with your body that make it really hard. And not being able to tour, not being able to, really do other things like I would DJ, or I was involved in some clubs I had downtown. Everything, even after COVID, was tough enough. And we were just rebuilding. I thought that was the low.
I know.
I was like, man, my friend died, COVID, but, the love and the support of the music community and my fans and friends and family, it blew my mind. And I didn't want to. I was embarrassed. I didn't want to ask. I never wanted to need and be that person. I like to be the guy paying the bill or the guy that puts on the benefit, but it's a lesson to learn, how to receive. So now we'll be 2 years in May. And, when I got back, I could at least play the guitar and sing and some of that. The pain and the energy I had made it hard I couldn't write for a while. I didn't, people say, just write songs, lay in bed, but there's a lot more to it, and everything takes a long time.
Now, did you lose, because with some strokes, people lose mobility, but not feeling necessarily. Did you lose both?
I had no feeling earlier below my waist, but now I have it, my upper thighs, there's some feeling, and, but down below, I don't, sound gross. I could step on a tack, I wouldn't know, or I could, I've burned my legs and stuff shaving under the sink, like in weird times, other things have happened I didn't even know,
Right.
So you got to really watch your skin. And Yeah, all this fun rock and roll stuff.
Do they think with stem cells it'll slowly come back, or?
They believe that a lot in the folks in Argentina, and it's all new. Some people say, oh, it's like the Wild West or whatever, but it's not harmful. It's my own stem cells. I had to get my stem cells removed from like a, kind of like your love handle area and then put back in. And the thing that appealed to me was the combination with the physical therapy and the stem cells. That really made me think that this is a good thing. And so when I was getting some progress and I was leaving there, I said to the main doctor, is this stuff that's happening, is this because of the therapy we did or the cells? And she said, we don't know. That's why we do both. And I thought it was, and they're not trying to push this and sell you more stem cells and come down here. Like they're trying and they're figuring out. The main doctor, her father had studied this for 30 years plus. And so I just went with it. And the other option was to stay in New York. I didn't have anywhere to live at the time. My insurance wasn't covering physical therapy. They weren't covering a new wheelchair, a bunch of things. Healthcare in America is tough, but I got to say Sweet Relief really got together with my manager and my friends that all came through to put together where people could donate, and then eventually benefit concerts and this album that was another thing. I mean, it was pretty great just even like emotionally to hear these songs too. Like it was a boost of like, wow, okay, in the lowest points, I'd be really low in Argentina and I didn't like the food, and it's a very meat place. I'm a vegetarian. Sure, I just felt I can't walk. I'm away from my friends, and so it's been a ride. But I've always preached since the hardcore days PMA, positive mental attitude, and it was a real. All right, you talk about PMA now. Deal with this. See if you can. All right, you're so positive. Okay, let's see how positive you are now.
One last break, and we'll be back with Jesse Malin.
The last few months have been sort of this incredible outpouring of your music. You had the tribute album, Silver Patron Saints, with a lot of friends, a lot of admirers, Springsteen and a lot of other people you played with. You've got a new single out, and you had a live album out last year too. Is that right?
Yeah, right before this happened, I had a record, Chasing a Light, a live record, and like a DVD film thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of something we filmed a lot of it during lockdown, pandemic and stuff, and it went with the record that we made at that time.
So what's this been like to see this kind of outpouring of people and your music everywhere and great reviews for this record?
It's been really touching, really humbling. I always believed in people and the power of people's energies and generosity. I'm an optimistic person in that way. But I know there's a lot of bad stuff in this world, a lot of bad people, but I've never seen it on this level. And I never like to receive. I always like to be the person, since I'm like 15, putting on benefits. And, the music community, it's not just the artists, it's everybody involved, the fans, the people. I think they're the most giving, caring people of any kind of community. And it's been overwhelming, but inspiring and just a lot to take in, a lot to, with what happened to me has been so hard and each day is tough, but that had made it so much brighter. And I guess there was funds that were needed, and that's a real thing. To hear these songs, to hear the music and to hear that, or just to see the messages from people that gave a lot too, as much, if not more.
It's also one of those tribute albums that they're faithful to the songs, all these versions, but they kind of reintroduce the songs in a nice way.
Yeah, sometimes I'd listen to it. I mean, they came in slowly. I had nothing to do with it. The record was put together. These two folks that one managed me, Diane Gentile, years ago, and my new manager, Dave Basin, and I was just in my recovery, and I left the country to go to South America, to Argentina, and I couldn't speak the language, I don't speak Spanish, I couldn't walk, and it was tricky. The nurses all speaking Spanish. And then little by little, these songs would trickle in, and they'd send me a song, have it on my iPhone, and didn't really have a sound system, and I'd be in my room or whatever, and I'd listen to it, and it would just make such a difference each time they came in, just to hear how these artists, that they took the time, went in the studio, gave so much of themselves, And then to hear the songs, some of them were so much better in my eyes than the original, or I was like, wow, I thought I was just fooling people with a crooked hat and a leather jacket. There's a song in there, like, hey, wow, it actually is something you could sing back, and hearing someone else do it. And it was just wonderful to hear all those different versions. And I felt like, to me, from someone that's been on compilations and tribute records, I felt that the artists went deep. They weren't phoning it in. Like, I could feel that they thought about it. That's how it came across to me.
I want to talk about the songs and the people as a way of talking about the songs. Let's start with the Springsteen, who you've played with before, who sang on one or two of your albums. And then he does just a great version of
She Don't Love Me
She Don't Love Me Now.
Yeah.
Which is just it's got a great sax solo. Tell me first about the song and then his take on the song.
We were going for it on my record, New York Before the War, to have a song kind of like Lee Dorsey, kind of New Orleans soul, Sam Cooke kind of song with stabs. And we were approaching that and recorded the song. And I don't think on that album I captured maybe the right tempo, or it wasn't ready yet. Sometimes songs need a little more time, but as we played it live, it kind of grew into one of the songs in my set that the crowds seemed to connect with.
The guitar sound on your version of it. I mean, I like his, but it's got a great.
Oh, cool. Well, that's Derek Cruz, who plays guitar with me, who I co-wrote the song with. We were just jamming at a studio called Tu Casa down on Avenue B, and I had this thing in my mind, and sometimes I freeform, and if somebody's just hitting some chords, sometimes the whole thing will come out. And that was one of those ones where he's just banging these things and hitting those stabs, and then the lyrics fell out and the melody fell out. But I felt like, I wish that we always could have re-recorded it a little quicker. But there it was, and live it became a song, and I guess that was the one that everybody thought when they're putting the record together to get to Bruce. And Danny Clinch was really helpful, reaching out, the photographer, who is a friend and a fan and just a guy we've worked with. And, Bruce has always been supportive. I mean, he was in touch with me a lot through this and checked in a lot from the road in Europe and stuff. So they tracked it, actually. I believe it was my band tracked it while I was away. And then they sent it to Jay Clemens, the sax player, and he played on it. And then it got to Bruce's studio, and then he sang on it. You wouldn't know when you hear it. I think I felt like he really took the time to get inside the song, but I never talked to him about it, or
Was that right?
It just all happened. They sent me the song, and there it was. So I was like, wow, this is cool. And I think he kind of got the soul thing more than we did, but he's the boss.
Yeah, he's literally the boss in this case. Yeah, I think what I like about both versions, but your version, it's one of those songs where you kind of hear the room. Yeah, if that makes any sense. And you don't hear that so much on records anymore, no matter how much reverb they put on them. You don't feel like you're hearing the room.
Yeah, I like that space. I mean, maybe it was something that harks back to a song I did on my first album, Queen of the Underworld, where there's those stabs and there's like a room and there's not a lot on it. I don't know. It's a 60s kind of approach too, I think, in some way.
Great version, About You, that Frank Turner does.
Yeah.
So tell me first about the song.
That song is something I wrote when I was in Europe and some different experiences. One verse, I was staying in a hotel where Chet Baker fell out the window, and he had put me in that room, and he died, and there's a plaque there, and I was dealing with some...
Can you still open the window? I guess
it was only the second floor. He must have been having some powerful stuff. But it's a connection to somebody, and it references a lot of travel, and I guess I didn't want my second album to be about the road and all that stuff, because I was touring a lot, because there's such cliche thing, and I tried to avoid that, but there's a few songs about the road. And that Frank Turner version was the first song that I heard, that when they said they're doing this tribute record for me, and this is the thing, it was the first song that came in. And I was frightened out of my mind. I was going to this doctor's office to remove fat to use for stem cells. And I was so frail and fragile. And I was in the waiting room, and it came in, and somebody forwarded it to me. And I was sitting in I had to go to Chicago. And that was really hard. And I listened to that, and I thought Frank did such a great job, like beautiful. It's one of my favorites, and he just stripped it down and just changed the melody. And I've always been a fan of him. If you see him live, he's a great songwriter, but he's a great performer.
and Shane by Rocky O'Riordan.
Yeah, you're picking some good ones. Yeah, I'd met Rocky or Corch or Kat. There's so many different ways I pronounce her name or call her. I met her. We were doing some benefit shows for Music in Memory. We do this Clash tribute night that we did in London and New York a few years in a row, and the money goes to the Stronger Foundation and Music in Memory for dementia. And she came and sang Lover's Rock from London Calling, the Clash song, and we connected. And I would go see her play with other people locally, and she's a bass player. I had seen her play in the Pogues at Danceteria, but it was so long ago. And I was asked to sing at Shane MacGowan's 60th birthday, and he was in a wheelchair, and it was in Dublin. And I went with Clem Burke and Glenn Matlock and some folks, and I sang some stuff, Spider from the Pogues. We did some of the early stuff from Shane's first band. And I met him again, and Corch, Rocky, was the bass player in the house band. And the house band had Shane sing, had Bono, Johnny Depp, Nick Cave, Bobby Gillespie, and Glenn Hazard. It was just crazy. And it was my experience when I wrote the song about being there and feeling like it was my Forrest Gump moment, like I'm on stage with all these people. And it was like, I felt like this New Yorker, that why am I here? I mean, I love Shane and the Pogues. I wrote about that, and she had been there. And then I guess they asked her to sing that song. And when I got that version back, it must have made sense to her, I would assume, somewhere the song, because she did it. But I loved the version. I just love what she did. And with the Irish accent, it made the song so much more real. I like it better than my version, too. Three of those.
Okay, because it's one of your best-known songs, Brooklyn.
Yeah.
With Dinosaur Jr. Tell me about that.
When I lived in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, after my mother died, and I had the van service, and I was a moving guy, me and my friends scrounged enough money together to have a first floor of a 3-level house or whatever. And I guess it would be 87 or something like that. And there would be some girl that lived upstairs, and she was very nice and knew some people we knew, and we were the only city freaks in the neighborhood of Greenpoint, Polish and Italian. And there'd be this crazy noise blasting this guitar that sounded like I don't know what it sounded like. It was so noisy. And it was Jay. He was dating this girl. He was up there. But we never talked, but I would hear him. And then years later, we would meet in different places and talk about that. And somehow we got a little friendly. But he, I guess, was contacted and agreed to do the song. And we'd been a little bit in touch, but not during that time of this accident for me. And I just love the way they played. He changed it up. He took some verses out. The drumming is great. I think the drum rolls, and it just has a sleazy swagger and very different version. Mm-hmm. So I was really taken in. Of course, his guitar playing is really, really cool.
So distinctive.
Yeah. Just that was nice.
And Bleachers, they do Prisoners.
Prisons of Paradise, yeah. That was another one where I heard it, and a month before this happened to me, I was in a dressing room in Brooklyn at the Barclays and seeing Bruce Springsteen. And, I'm just in this dressing room, and it was kind of a strange thing. He just usually after shows, sometimes you'll get a text, Bruce wants to say hello. And so we went back, and I had missed him at the Garden, so I figured I'll say hello. And I get back in the dressing room, and there's nobody really there. It's Bruce and this guy with crazy glasses on, younger guy. And then in comes Jan Wenner, who coincidentally is in a wheelchair. I'd never met Jan Wenner, but he's nice, and everyone's talking to Bruce about the show. I started talking to Bruce about him meeting Shane MacGowan recently. He went to his house. Like, we're just having some music talk. Bruce, You hang out with Bruce, and you forget that it's him. He's just like becomes one of your friends that you grew up with and geeking out on music. Like it really feels that real, and he's just down to earth like that. And there's this other guy, and he's talking about suicide with these goofy glasses on. I'm like, what's this? And he's really nice. And he's like, and Jesse knows. And we're talking about Alan Vega, and we're talking to Bruce. And then we leave. Bruce says, you know what, guys, I got to go. He doesn't have one of these people to come in and say, Bruce, we're 5 minutes. He just says it. He goes, right. Okay, I'm out of here. Yeah. There's no problem, being really direct, and it's nice. I walk out into the street, down, and the guy with the glasses says to me, yeah, you want to take a ride into the city? You need a ride. And I was like, nah, I'm going to go drink at this bar, Smith Street Social or something. I'm in Brooklyn for once, But but I didn't realize who it was. And I guess we had met before in some clubs, but it was Jack. And so it was
Jack Antonoff.
Yeah, Jack Antonoff. And I was like, God, I should have probably taken a ride with him in the cab. Would have been a nice thing. He's got a studio at Electric Lady. We're neighbors. He was nice. I didn't realize who it was till after. I'm like, oh, that's who it was. But somehow, down the line, someone that knew someone, a friend of a friend that bumped into someone that manages him somewhere in the summer, and it came up, and he was down to do, I guess they sent him a handful of songs. He picked Prisoners. And when I heard it back, I was like, wow, this is like Johnny Cash, Suicide. It's like such a cool, like he's got his own spin. Like, wow, this is great. And then they asked me, what do you think this record should be called? And that was the only input I had. I don't sing on it. I wrote the songs, but so I was like, I don't know. And then that song came in, and I was like, Silver Patron Saints. It's in the verse of Prisoners. There's the title. Yeah, he did so good. I love it when it's different.
And then, there's some people from the good old days, like
hardcore in there.
Yeah, Agnostic Front and Murphy's Law, and doing God is Dead.
Agnostic Front did God is Dead. I was like, wow, Vinny Stigma. But the thing that also, besides the great versions and how much people gave, is just to have a record that, for me, has Agnostic Front and Bruce Springsteen on it, and Lucinda Williams and Murphy's Law, and they're all. It's like I was like, I guess I have pretty crazy life, but it makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. The last time I saw you, you were playing with Lucinda Williams.
Okay.
And it was a City Winery show, and people know that she had a stroke and has come back, and she's had various problems, and it was after that. And I remember during our interview, she was telling me how thrilled she was that you were working with her, and what a great songwriter you were. So first of all, how did you guys originally meet?
We met at the Blue Note at a Charlie Watts gig in 2004. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Ryan Adams, bass player, might have been dating her, Billy, and I don't know. We all went there, and we just hit it off. I'd been a fan, and we started talking, and just we stayed in touch and became friends. If we were in the same city, Chicago or LA, New York, we would get together and hang out and have some really fun nights and great conversations. And we found out we have the same birthday in January, and I just felt a real connection. And then I realized she lived in New York, and she played in Queens, where I'm from. In 1980, she came and lived in the East Village and lived where I was living now on 2nd Street and 1st Avenue at that time. And we just stayed friends, and that was it. And then at one point, we made a record, Sunset Kids, my second to last record from now. And her and her husband, Tom Overby, produced the record, and it was great, and we did a little writing together too, and we had such a great experience making that record. It was one of my favorites. We did some in LA where she was living, and some in New York. They love New York, her and her husband. So when she had the stroke, I was so upset. It was COVID, and it was just, everything was so bleak, but she couldn't play guitar, and so I don't know if I offered or they asked, but I ended up coming to Nashville several times and sat in the kitchen and wrote songs with them, and we wrote a bunch, and because she couldn't play guitar, I'd play the guitar, and just trying to help out, and know what would happen with these songs. They have many, we went through many, and some of them ended up on that record, and it was just a great experience. So you're sitting at the kitchen table, and it's your friend, and you're bring out some carrots, bring out some chips and dip or whatever, and then here's a beer, and then suddenly that voice pops out, and you turn your head, and it's Lucinda, and it's like, wow, we're in the kitchen here, but it's a good place to cook up a song. And so I was helping her out with a stroke. So some of the songs made the album, and one that I sang with her on stage, New York Comeback, and stuff like that. So yeah, a few that I wrote with her. So it was really wild when then I have a stroke, after just doing this, helping somebody, and a different kind of stroke. But yeah, it was just another strange thing connected to this.
You talk about sitting with a guitar, writing songs with her. Have songs, not to say that songs ever come easily, have they always come for you? Has music always come? If you sit down with a guitar, do you know something's going to come out the other end?
Well, the more you sit down, the more you'll get stuff. I mean, there is writer's block. It's a real thing. I was once on a songwriter panel in South by Southwest with a bunch of writers, and one was Pat D'Annunzio, the late Pat D'Annunzio of the Smithereens. He had a lot of hits, and funny guy. So somebody asked a question, hey, Pat, what's the best cure for writer's block? And he said, ass in chair. And the thing is that you sit down and I record a lot of stuff that I do. It's nice you think it's garbage and you listen back a week later or a couple of days and there's something in there. Every time you sit down, you might not finish a song and write Bridge Over Troubled Water or whatever, but if you sit down, you do it, you're going to get something, and then some days you're going to hit some really good things. So I think to stay active with it. And then another thing I got was like the Joe Strummer thing, like no input, no output. You got to constantly, as a writer, if I listen to my favorite records, I'm desensitized to them. I love them unless I'm a little drunk, a little buzzed, and I hear it in a different way. But otherwise, when I hear new things, they make me want to write. When I see a new film, or I get like, when something's just coming at me for the first time, it inspires me to kind of do that. Mm-hmm. I used to carry a little notebook. Now sometimes I write on the phone. People think you're texting. If I go to a film, I get ideas. Just, you gotta cut out the world. We're always being inundated with emails and this and Instagram, and like, that early part of the morning to not turn the phone on, that late at night, like just to really get that quiet time, and also to take things in and from all different things and then be able to spit it out.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense. I didn't know you were so interested in film, but you've got very visual songs. You're that kind of writer.
Well, thank you. Yeah. A certain film, a certain period of time, but still, I just saw a movie, The Last Showgirl. It was with Pamela Anderson, which I didn't know what that was going to be like, and it was
How was it?
Really good. Yeah. It's like a female version of The Wrestler in a way, but made by one of the Coppola grandchildren.
With that, after you had your stroke, did the music go for a while, or were you sitting there? You spent, I'm sure, a lot of long, tedious hours in hospitals. Were you thinking,
yeah, well, every little thing you got to do is taking so long, and everything is very scary, and this is all kinds of tests. But I did eventually get the guitar brought to the hospital and see what it was like, and to see what it was like to sing. And eventually, when they taught me how to get out of the bed and how to get my body in a wheelchair was a big step. And then eventually the guitar was sitting in the corner, and eventually the wheelchair rolled over, and I closed the hospital door. As much as I played with lots of people all these years, when I'm alone playing a guitar or writing a song, it's a very private, personal moment. And and I didn't know what it was going to sound like. And I closed the hospital door, and I just started to sing. And I think the first song I did was Room 13, which is one from Sunset Kids. And it's a song about being isolated and having to reflect on your whole life. But I don't know why. It's a key that I thought would be nice. And I was like, oh, this is here. And little by little, I would play and didn't have a lot of time. And eventually I wheeled myself we got me in a car in the back of a special cab or whatever, and I got down to a rehearsal place where it didn't have stairs, and they put a mic in front of me, and the band was there, and suddenly those guys were right in front of me, and it was super emotional, but it seemed to go really well. And I was just like, wow, this is still here, and it was hard to sit, and things hurt, my shoulder getting over it was a lot of different, because I'm a very physical singer, at least the ones I always grew up watching, from the Bad Brains to Otis Redding, or it's like, use your body, and I'm nervous, so like I move my body a lot, but like it was a different focus, and it felt good.
Well, keep writing.
Yeah.
It's been just wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Best of luck with everything.
Thank you.
In the episode description, you'll find a link to a playlist of some of our favorite Jesse Malin tracks. Be sure to check us out on YouTube at youtube.com/Broken Record Podcast to see all of our video interviews. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at The Broken Record Pod. You can follow us on Twitter at Broken Record. Broken Record is produced and edited by Leah Rose, with marketing help from Eric Sandler and Jordan McMillan. Our engineer is Ben Tolliday. Broken Record is a production of Pushkin Industries. And if you like this show, please remember to share, rate, and review us on your podcast app. Our theme music's by Kenny Beats. I'm Justin Richmond.